Welcome to Brandstorm, the podcast that talks to the people behind America's brands. I'm Dan Trzynski, president of Platypus Advertising and Design.
And I'm Nancy Christopher, PR director at Platypus. Being the first, the only, or most unique is obviously a great advantage for brands trying to get the attention of its customers. It's also easier said than done. Our guest today says he uses strategies to develop niche-specific quality content that is not only engaging, but delivers new customers. Please welcome Michael Greenberg, CEO of Call for Content and author of the Authority Marketing Playbook. Thanks for joining us, Michael.
Hi, Michael.
Nancy, Dan, it's great to be here today. Thanks for having me.
So tell us more about Call for Content. What does your company do?
So we are what I like to call a podcasting agency now.
Oh.
And our background is in B2B content marketing. That's where we started, and that's where we developed the strategies in authority marketing that went into the playbook. And we made a move from doing B2B content marketing focused on lead generation to podcasting when we saw that the most effective content we produced for our clients was around podcast-based strategies.
Didn't we come up with that idea too, Dan?
Absolutely.
We're talking to our competitor here.
Right. Not
No,
really.
I don't really have competitors, so to speak.
No, I
in
know.
this space. I think
We're
I
bigger
was
than
on
that,
Sweet
Michael.
Fish.
We're okay with this.
Yeah.
There's enough business for everyone.
Right.
So what kind of content should companies be developing these days?
Well, when we ask ourselves what kind of content should we be producing for this client, the first thing we do is go out and do a bunch of direct customer research and see what kind of content will work for that client. And what we've seen is that unless it's that millennial Gen Xer in tech politics or one of those, let's call them a little more technology friendly industries with higher levels of education overall, there's a good chance that there aren't going to be that many podcast listeners for a show. What we've seen from that is that the podcast may still be the thing to start with, not because people will listen, but because it allows us to create the written content that people will read. And it allows us to do that in voice. Because our original company strategy when we made blogs first was sitting down and interviewing the subject matter expert.
Yeah, and that's hard too because it just doesn't come off as it's them, right?
Exactly. And so to get around that, what we've ended up going through is we had a pretty strict process for turning their exact words into blog posts. And so now we've gone to start with the podcast, interview them there, and then repurpose that content into the blog posts or the little videos or whatever else we need.
That seems smart.
Yeah, that's a good idea. I like that.
Thanks.
You talk about creating that authentic voice. And I'm assuming that the podcast is kind of that way that you create that authentic voice?
It's become the easiest one. It's the most cost effective because if we've got somebody from the company in that host role, then all the content that comes out is in the company voice.
When you use the social media, do you use the audio?
So we'll pull quotes out and then we'll also pull like shortened audio quotes and create small videos around them. And then for some clients, we'll go so far as to create like a teaser of the episode and then have that link to a blog about the same topics and have that link to the podcast as well if somebody wants to listen.
So who's the voice of the company? Who should it be in your opinion? Should it be the leader of the company or just any subject matter expert from a company?
Yeah, that's a good question. The size of the company makes a huge difference. So if you're a 20 or 30 person company, you've got to have the founder on it. You've got to have the owner. If you're 150, then maybe it's a division head. Maybe it's your VP sales, depending on the use of the show. And then if you're a 1,000 or 2,000 person company, if you're a real large organization, then depending on the import of the podcast, you might have a full-time team just for that.
Well, I'm sure it's much easier to get a leader of a 20 or 30 person company, knowing that we went through this ourselves when we started this podcast, is trying to get me to sit down to write a blog was impossible. But
all of us,
you're busy and you're pour over every word and stuff like that, where sitting down for 20 minutes for a podcast, you can make time for that.
And you'll see it in the content strategy that Call for Content as a business actually uses. Is I knew I didn't have time to create content when we started.
Right.
I've got my own hobby podcast now, and so we just put out ebooks, big playbooks, like the Authority Marketing Playbook. And we went that direction because we knew we didn't have the resources in terms of time to create consistent content. And so it would be a fool's errand to go after it at that point.
So-
But now we're getting ready to roll out podcasts with the division heads
Sure.
for each one of our lines because I still just don't have time to run that
Right.
weekly show.
Right.
So we talked about podcasting, video, blogging, the playbook. What other types of content do you create for clients?
So I've started to see an uptick in audio courses. Some of you listeners out there might remember the Jim Rohn CDs, Tony Robbins CD, the
Right.
audio courses.
Everybody
from
knows
back in
Tony
the day.
Robbins, right?
Yeah. And audio courses kind of went away for a while. But now as podcasting is starting to rise in popularity, as more people are just listening to those long videos and that sort of thing, we've seen audio courses start to make a comeback, especially with coaching clients. And outside of that, it's not so much in the variety of different content formats, but in the way we plan the content, where I've started to see real change. We've got more channels now than ever to create content through. And so developing a content strategy that, one, connects with customers from the start, and two, that is designed from the ground up for repurposing content has been the real shift that I've seen recently.
So this might be a three-part question, but what are some of your strategies for making the content that you've developed stand out, more engaging, generate more leads is what we're all after, right?
Yeah. So the first one that I've seen, and to borrow from another one of our competitors, content-based networking is a term that's started to come up. The guys at Sweetfish Media popularized it. They're one of the oldest podcasting agencies out there, and they
Right.
specialize in like middle market tech companies.
Okay.
And so using the content to start to open the door on new potential relationships with clients or partners who can lead you to partnerships that are going to bring in large batches of clients is the first thing to look at. So at a podcast, this could be positioning your show to focus on interviewing ideal clients for your business, or it could be creating a series of interviews with high-profile leaders at software companies who serve the same industry and using that to open the door to partnerships with them. And so that's definitely number one. Too many companies just make their content for SEO or just make their content to share in their newsletter and don't think about who they could be creating their content with to get more mileage out of it. And then along with that, customer research, actually speaking with potential customers and speaking with current customers and using that information to inform your content choices and to create the content that they might want to see. If you're talking with your key accounts, they will recommend content to you. They'll ask you questions. And all of that can be used to create content that is engaging for them and that is then useful as part of your business development processes in the future. Creating content that supports those sales and business development initiatives really becomes the core of making sure you get fast returns.
I'm a big believer in customer research, but one of the most difficult things I think I find in the agency business is finding clients that are willing to invest and invest properly in that part of the process. Do you find that difficult to price that and to do the amount of research that's necessary to develop a good content strategy?
So for our authority marketing clients who are bringing us in to do this larger scale lead generation with content, the first engagement that we have is fixed engagement at $2,500 in 6 weeks, where we audit their current information and carry out research of our own. And so that's helped ease that process quite a bit because it's not so pricey and it lets us feel each other out.
Okay. And how many of their customers do you engage with or talk to find out what kind of content they would be interested in receiving for that kind of money?
Yeah, so we will do direct customer interviews with up to 5 customers. And then we'll also normally send out a survey and then reach out to people who match the ideal customer personas, but are not current customers to get feedback outside as well.
Okay, so you got kind of a qualitative and quantitative approach to it.
Exactly.
Yeah,
and we
that's great.
blend that together to create the personas.
Yeah.
Okay, so your book is called The Authority Marketing Playbook. What do you mean by authority, and why do you think it's so important?
When I say authority, I am talking about being the person that your target audience thinks of when they want to know about your subject of expertise, what you're an authority in.
Okay.
So the 2 ways I talk about authority are in terms of specialization and relativity. Specialization the more you niche down, the more you specialize your business and the group that you serve with it, the easier it is to build your authority because you've got a smaller audience and you've got a more specific topic. Becoming an authority in digital marketing takes a long time. Becoming an authority in digital marketing for dentists takes a little less time. Becoming an authority for lead gen with Facebook ads for dentists' practices in middle market cities, that's a very specific niche. That's laser focused.
That certainly is.
Sure.
And that's something where you can become the authority in a couple months. Because going to the second part, authority is relative. The only people you need to be an authority for are the people who are actually going to buy from you, or who are thinking about it, or who you'd like to be thinking about it. And so if you're that Facebook ads lead gen for dentists in middle market cities, you don't care if a small town dentist knows who you are in the same way.
Right.
And you certainly don't care if an orthodontist does.
Right.
You're focused on the dentists. And so that gives you the constraints on your content that allow you to really learn about and speak that language of that single market.
One thing about the word authority, there's a lot of people out there claiming to be the experts. How do you get to the why should I believe you part?
Why should you believe me, Michael Greenberg, personally?
No. Why should I believe the person that says he's the authority for lead generations for dentists in medium-sized markets
on Facebook?
Right.
Yeah. So I like to talk about the 3 different types of authorities.
Sure.
Flow into the other.
What are those?
So one is a best in class. So that's you've proven your expertise, you've proven your authority on a verifiable track record of knowing what you're doing and talking about because you've done it well for quite a while or several times successfully. The next is the simplifier, which is taking those complex concepts like understanding how you can use and benefit with Facebook ads down to speaking to people who don't know anything about the industry. And so for that, you might not need the same level of experience as somebody who's best in class, but you need the ability to translate. And then number 3 is who I like to call the innovators, who are doing the thing that goes against the grain. And those people prove their authority by showing success with unconventional tactics.
That's harder.
So yeah, that's definitely the hardest, but it's the one that also sets you up for the most success because it puts you in a position where it's much more difficult to copy. And so to prove yourself, I like to use content, and I like the first content we create with customers is looking at what questions people ask. We try to get some recorded sales calls if we can, and we look at what questions they're asking to prove that the customer is asking our client to try to figure out if they really know what they're talking about. And so then we create that content first, so that way we can answer that question before they ask it.
How do you determine the best way to push it out? What channels to take?
This goes back to the customer research. Normally, if I look at your business and you give me your customer list and who's buying from you, I can probably give you a pretty good idea just looking at it, where they're going to be online or if they're going to be online at all. But we don't truly know that answer until we ask. And it comes back to the research.
Are you finding any one of those tactics better than another? You start with a podcast, and so then it's like, okay, well, you share it, you push it out on LinkedIn or Facebook. Is it all just totally industry dependent, or are you seeing any one thing better than another?
LinkedIn's definitely popular right now. They've been working to improve their user experience, and so more people are using LinkedIn, and that's where we're seeing some of the best results with lead generation. As a company, our background is in B2B. Facebook's definitely newer to us.
Sure.
And I don't think I've seen a client where we've used Facebook groups yet. And I think that has more to do with the clients we work with, where we work with a lot of B2B service providers, and we work with a lot of B2B technology companies. And then we've started to expand into the B2C markets. So for us, LinkedIn and
really
Twitter,
Yeah, I would think so in B2B especially.
selling into the millennial or Gen X or executive, Instagram has become a powerful tool.
Are there any tools out there, Michael, that would help companies with their content marketing? What do you recommend?
Thousands.
Yeah, thousands.
In marketing technology, there's always 100 tools. But I really like to try to keep things as simple as possible. And Google Docs is probably my number one. Creating your content in a place where everyone can access it and comment on it has been huge for us. And it makes it really easy to be able to share a draft of an article or an ebook with a client and then just have them comment and make their edits right in there and tracked. Along with that, otter.ai is a transcription tool that has been invaluable as a company to us. I think it's $80, $70 or $80 a year. You get essentially unlimited automated transcription. And so that's given us the ability to have every call with anyone recorded and transcribed. And it gives us a big searchable database of information as we continuously speak with a client or with another subject matter expert or ones of different types to build up that library where we can go back and pull whole paragraphs of quotes and use that to put together our articles.
Those are great tips. Thank you so much. We'll be sure to put that in our show notes there.
Everybody's about ROI these days and measurement. So how can you really determine whether your content marketing strategy is working? What do you use as baseline matrix?
Yeah, so we look at qualified leads in as our number one. And backing out from that, we look at, I call it emails, but in most companies, that would be leads that have not yet been qualified. And so when we're looking at, is our content marketing successful? We see how many leads we're getting, if those leads are of good quality. And we want to try to maintain anywhere from a 5 to 10% of leads in being qualified leads from a marketing perspective, and then tracking those leads through the sales process and seeing where they convert. And so I know that appearing on a podcast like this leads me to about an 80-85% close rate if somebody contacts us after listening to a podcast episode. But if they're coming in off an AdWords ad, we've got maybe a 15 or 20% close.
Do you help people with setting up that whole process for measurement? I mean, some people have a CRM, but they don't really use it appropriately, and they don't put the stuff in, and they don't quote it quite right, and so then it's kind of garbage in, garbage out.
Yeah. So my background is in B2B growth strategy and technology-enabled operations. I was consulting and then kind of stumbled into this agency thing. And that's the first things we set up with a client where we're doing lead generation, because it's important for us to be able to report those to the client, and it's important for them to understand what we're doing for them.
A lot of those things are beyond your control, right? So what if they're just not adhering to the protocol of where the lead came from? Okay, they get a phone call from a podcast that they heard that got shared somewhere on LinkedIn. Are you capturing all of it?
So we try to capture everything.
Yeah.
We're almost never successful.
An honest man.
Thank you.
But we always have the email data.
Right.
And we always try to get what makes a marketing qualified lead. So at the minimum, we can track to that far. And if we can track to that point, then at the end of an engagement with a client, if they're on the fence because they don't know if we really showed value because they weren't tracking everything, then on that closing call, we will just go down the list and say, okay, what happened with this lead? What happened with this one? What happened with that one?
How do you shift when the answer was, well, they couldn't afford us? They had an excuse for everything, and they're not closing business. How do you shift your strategy or your content strategy to get better leads?
So it's a difficult question. A lot of times I've found the issue is not necessarily with the quality of lead coming from the marketing, but the quality of the sales process.
Blame the client. I love that.
I mean, it's if the client is the only salesperson in their organization, there's a very good chance that has been the issue more than once. And if they don't have any close rate going in, then that's normally a red flag to us.
Then do you just kind of walk away at that point, or do you try to help them?
I try to help. Like I said, I've done that whole operations thing before. And so we have resources to help somebody make sure they have a good sales process in place. And if they're still not seeing success, and hopefully we've got some call recordings at this point as well, then if it turns out that the leads just aren't working that we're getting in, we take a look at different leads. We take a look at different avenues. Normally, where we see the most issue with lead quality is if we're running an ad-based strategy for lead generation for that first.
AdWords or that type of thing where it's just blind, right?
Yeah, there's a lot more unqualified traffic. If we're doing something like using a podcast for lead generation and we're inviting guests on who should be a good fit for the client as customers, we can figure out where that issue is pretty quick. And so it depends how we're using the content and the lead generation strategy on how easy it is for us to determine if this is a marketing issue or this is a client operations and sales issue.
Well, this has been really interesting, Michael. Thank you so much. If someone wants to learn more about content marketing, what's the best way to connect with you?
So the best way to connect with me is to go to callforcontent.com. callforcontent.com, And on the site, there'll be a little chat thing that pops up in the corner, little widget. And if you select office hours there, you'll be able to book with me for my office hours. I try to have a session every day, but it ends up being more like a couple times a week. And they're completely free. I'll talk about anything from bread making to content marketing with you. and we'll hopefully both walk away with a little more knowledge.
That's great.
That's
Thank you.
great. Thanks
Thank
so
you.
much, Michael. This has been very helpful.
Yeah.
And if you have any questions for Dan or me about today's episode, please feel free to contact us on our LinkedIn pages. If you'd like what you've heard today, please don't hesitate to share, review, and subscribe to Brandstorm.
This is Dan Trzynski along with Nancy Christopher at Platypus Advertising and Design, an awesome company that creates perceptions that influences choice. We hope you'll join us next week for another episode of Brandstorm.